Welcome, everyone, to the Information's TITV. My name is Akash Pasricha. It is Tuesday, June 23rd. We are starting off the show today focusing on the ballooning AI budgets companies are spending on Anthropic and OpenAI. Our AI reporter, Laura Bratton, joins us to break down her latest story on how businesses are hunting for cheaper alternatives. We've then got the CEO of Superhuman, formerly known as Grammarly, coming on the show to talk about their latest acquisition. We'll bring on our Elon Musk reporter to talk about whether Tesla and SpaceX's share prices are at all interrelated. And we're going to close out the show with a deep dive into AI agent loops and what they actually mean for your daily workflow. It's going to be a great show, so let's get right on into it. AI models remain pricey and in some cases are getting more expensive, which has left customers no choice but to seek cheaper alternatives. My colleagues Laura Bratton and Catherine Perloff published a story today about why that isn't always such a difficult trade-off. I want to bring on Laura to share more about what she found. Laura, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Good to be here.
How big an issue is it right now that model costs are going up for companies?
It's becoming more and more of an issue. The companies that I spoke to said that the rising bills that they're seeing from Anthropic and OpenAI have begun to affect their profit margins. And because of that, they're looking to use cheaper alternatives because if they can use AI in a cost-efficient way to grow their business, which is the intention of using the tools in the first place, that's obviously what they want to do.
Okay, so how are they lowering their costs?
So they're looking to use cheaper alternatives from Anthropic and OpenAI to the, latest and greatest frontier models. So in some cases, that might be OpenAI's GPT Mini or Anthropic's Haiku models rather than Opus or Sonnet. And then in some cases, they're looking to use open source models or develop their own custom small models, or using a smaller or medium size model from a company like Cohere. And that's really what they're doing to try and cut down on some of the costs.
Cohere is kind of interesting. They're a Canadian company, so is this at all related to the Fable ban?
That's a really interesting point. So Cohere in particular told me that they've actually, since the Anthropic export controls, have seen a massive increase in inbound interest from customers and governments looking to kind of diversify their model usage and not just be locked into any one vendor. And that actually prompted them to triple their annual recurring revenue projection for the calendar year 2027. They wouldn't disclose what the figure was, but I thought that it was a really stark example of how this shift from the top performing frontier models towards more model optionality is already creating tailwinds for companies like Cohere, Hugging Face, Together AI, stuff like that.
And let's stick with these closed source models for a minute here, because Anthropic and OpenAI, they are largely closed source models, the ones that are most popular. Are there ways to make those models less expensive without changing to another company's fleet entirely?
Definitely. I mean, there's tons you can do, and I should say that the companies I spoke with that are beginning to use open source or cheaper models, not all of them are switching completely away from Anthropic and OpenAI. They're just beginning to explore more options. Of course, there are some small companies that are really stark examples of saying, hey, I'm going to switch completely from Anthropic, Opus, or Sonnet models to something like Alibaba's Quinn. But one thing, as you mentioned, companies can use harnesses, which is basically a software layer that sits on top of an AI model, and also, you know, basically edit their prompts to make running the AI model a little bit more cost efficient and a little bit cheaper. So there are ways other than just using a cheaper model to make using AI less expensive. And there's a ton of startups working on helping companies with this. I spoke to a couple like CodeStrap and Martian AI, and those are a couple companies that are trying to help with this sort of harness prompt layer. Model routers will sort of route different AI tasks to different providers. That, I guess, gets into the layer of choosing different models as well. But yeah.
So on the open source piece here, and I should say, I don't think anyone is suggesting that companies are moving to open source entirely. I mean, I think the trend that we're seeing is that people are starting to consider them more and consider cheaper models because, as we've talked about on the show, some of these models just need to be good enough. They don't need to be the frontier models to get some of these tasks done. But there was some interesting data that you collected in your story about the proportion of model use that is relying on open source versus closed source model now. And I thought it was interesting because, I mean, open source really accounts for a much higher percentage of model use now compared to closed source, which I didn't know.
Yeah, it's tough because so I got the data from Open Router. Open Router shares a lot of publicly available data. Some data they'd previously posted suggested this trend, but they wouldn't tell me exactly who's using Open Router, so we don't have a great total look into which companies are using this tool to really fully understand how widespread this trend is. But I will say that as you mentioned, Open Router data showed that the majority of tokens processed through its router are going to open source rather than frontier models from Anthropic and OpenAI. And those open source models are primarily DeepSeek and Minimax. And, Open Router processes tens of trillions of tokens monthly. So it really is significant to note this trend because it was quite the opposite last year, where the majority was processed, you know, via Anthropic and OpenAI. And I think it's also a trend we see validated through other router companies and, companies like Fireworks that provide infrastructure and a platform for companies to use open source models are really seeing the tokens processed on open source models through their platforms skyrocket.
Why are companies so more willing now to use open source models from China, where a year ago they may not have been?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, first of all, cost has become, you know, a major issue. I really think what I've heard is that in the last 3 months in particular, and some companies have shouted out, are reporting, on Uber blowing through its AI budget in at the first few months of the year that it intended to spend for the whole year really started a slew of conversations. And I've heard from companies like ServiceNow, Snowflake, even Databricks, that they're thinking about internal AI costs and concerned about rising AI costs. And obviously, that's something we see validated across the internet and social media from a number of other companies, and other media outlets have begun to report on this as well. But as costs have become more of an issue, I think companies have become more willing to try different things. And also, what I heard is that this time last year, when Chinese open source models were beginning to improve, companies were a little bit worried there might be hidden cybersecurity vulnerabilities. For example, there could be some sort of backdoor in these models that would allow them to behave maliciously or share a company's sensitive data back with the Chinese lab that created the model. But as we've seen, that hasn't really happened. There's been no evidence of that happening, and so companies have become willing to adopt these models. I spoke to one model router provider, and they said that a number of Fortune 100 companies they've spoken with are all interested in using the Chinese models or are already using them. And even if they're not exactly advertising that, it's something that they're thinking about, and that includes large financial services providers.
How big a problem is this for OpenAI and Anthropic if people are going with not even just other models, but the less expensive models that they offer?
Well, I think it just shows that Anthropic and OpenAI will, not have neither will have a complete monopoly over this space. Obviously, it remains to be seen if these frontier model providers, uh, if their models improve to an extent that is, significant beyond the capabilities of open source models, and open source models don't catch up, then I'm sure we could see that, the staying power of the frontier models is much stronger than maybe it is right now. Um, but yeah, I think it speaks to the fact that these companies may face more competition than previously thought.
Great. Well, Laura, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Laura Bratton, our AI reporter here at The Information. Superhuman, the company formerly known as Grammarly, is buying GPTZero, a startup that allows you to detect whether or not content is AI generated. Joining me now to discuss the acquisition in an exclusive broadcast appearance is Shishir Mehrotra, CEO of Superhuman. Shishir, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Why did you decide to buy GPTZero?
Oh yeah, I'm really excited about this one. I think in the world we're facing today, one of the most fun stats I saw is the word of the year right now is AI slop. And we're just inundated with the challenge of determining what's actually human and what's not. The leading company in this category is a company called GPTZero. Runs a set of popular products for authenticity, an AI detector, a hallucination detector, a product called AI Vision, and a product called Replay, that are all a suite of products designed to help people discover what's human and what's not. They scaled really fast, 19 million users, over 30 million in ARR in less than 3 years. And we're just really excited to bring them into the Superhuman family and scale the product to work with tens of millions of more users working right where they work.
30 million in ARR. Can you tell us what you paid for them?
No, it's a private transaction, so we won't share much about the deal. It's one of the pleasures of working at a private company.
Yeah, yeah.
But
We gotta
I
ask
think
though. We got
everybody's quite happy with the deal.
we gotta ask. We gotta ask. So okay, so this is kind of interesting. You already had Superhuman and the Grammarly suite. You already had a plagiarism detector, right? So is this going to add to that offering?
Yeah, so actually the team is gonna we're combining the offerings and making one authenticity suite. I'm asking the leaders of GPT-Zero to become the leaders of our authenticity division here at Superhuman. But yes, we've been working in this category for a while. It's part of why I was so interested in it, is just watching how quickly it's taking off. We have a very popular AI detector built by the Grammarly team, as well as you mentioned, a plagiarism detector and so on.
Right.
And we're taking that family of products all into a single suite.
And AI hallucination detector. I mean, help us understand what does that product look like? Like what do you put in and what's the output of that?
Yeah, there's a lot of derivatives of AI detection that get a little bit more specific. Hallucination detection is looking at something that's written and trying to figure out not just was it generated or not by AI, but just is it real or not. There's a really
So like
popular.
fact checking is that the
Yeah, so
idea?
a lot of times it'll be fact checking, it'll be citation checking. There was an article recently that KPMG was hired by another company to do a review of how they were using AI inside the company, and ironically, the report was cited for having a number of hallucinations. That it cited quotes and so on that just didn't exist. And so this product goes a step beyond, is it likely to be AI generated, but actually go through it, check the facts themselves, and say, does it match what is real and what's not? Does it match the citations? And really get to the heart of hallucinations.
Right.
Very popular product.
So now the heart of what I want to get to with you, Shashir, is if you look at the suite of offerings that Superhuman and Grammarly has, and you're upfront about this in the press release. I mean, you say we are now playing on both sides of this ecosystem in terms of our products help people edit their writing with AI. In some cases, it can offer recommended rewrites as well for passages with writing. So that's kind of on the AI content generation side, and then you have the AI content detection side. So you're playing both sides here. I wonder if you can take us into the decision to play on both those sides, and whether or not you see those as sort of two contradictory offerings at all.
I think the world is headed to a trying to find that middle ground. It's very clear. I have this conversation with my kids a lot. Yeah, one in college, one in high school, and every student is facing this. That on one side they're being told, "Be careful how much AI you use. There's going to be there's penalties for it, and so on." On the other side, they're being told, "Hey, you need to move forward in the workforce, and we're going to use these tools effectively and in the right ways." And so you need to be up to speed on how all of them work. And I think that's true of every professional, every knowledge worker. You should be using AI. It's not the case that it's one of the most magical set of technologies and tools that have been invented in decades, and the idea of not using them is silly. It doesn't mean that you should use it instead of your own voice. It doesn't mean you should do it in ways that will be interpreted by readers as not genuine, or even worse, wrong. And so my view of it is that you actually need all of those tools in a single suite. You need that ability to help me write well, help me finish what I'm working on, take over tasks for me, but also make sure I sound like me, make sure that I don't say things that are incorrect. And you want that set of co-editors working with you at the same time.
Right.
One analogy I'll use for it a lot, I think of a lot of what we're doing with AI is if you just personify as agents, just taking your own work. If you're a journalist, you have one side, you have sets of people that help you write. They might go out and do parts of your story for you. They'll go do pre-checks for you, so on. The other side, you have an editor whose job is to make sure that what you're saying is correct and making sure that it matches the standard of what you're trying to put out there. I think each of them are an important part of the suite.
So, I guess it sort of leads us to sort of this broader question, which is, what is then the threshold for how much AI should be allowed in writing? What is to AI? What is authentic? I guess is the name of the division that you've created. But I'm thinking about the scenario where, have you ever given Grammarly a passage, said, "Help me rewrite it," and then put that passage into GPT-Zero, and does it say, "Well, this is to AI"? Like, I don't know. It seems like kind of a moving target in a way, right?
I mean, I think the idea is to help people assess, and it depends on the situation. I mean, if I send you a note and I say it's from me, you expect it to be from me.
Yeah.
If I set up an agent whose job is to write the project status report every week by pulling together lots of different information and give us a consolidated report, so none of us have to do the work, it's pretty obvious it's not going to be any of us. It's going to be generated by AI. So it depends what that situation is. So I don't think there is a you must always be at one extreme or the other. It's being able to assess, when you said you want to be at this extreme, did you achieve that? And from the reader's perspective, or the receiver's perspective, does it match their expectations? I think the
So,
challenge
so,
is
so in
that
other words, you would say, like, there are situations where, I mean, you put writing into GPT-Zero, there are situations where it will tell you, yeah, this is AI generated, and that's fine, and
that's
that
fine.
this
Yeah.
is a logistical piece of writing. But then there are essays that students will write, for example, and you will sort of look for the badge of authenticity there in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, the student case is really interesting because you'll find teachers doing both extremes, right? So you'll say the professor will give students an assignment, and sometimes they'll say, "Please don't use AI. I will be checking there's an honor code, there's a tool, and so on." And I view it as the equivalent of when you go in to take the SATs these days, there's one section that is without calculators, and there's another section that's with calculators. And the professor will often also hand you an assignment that says, and in this case, I want you to use every tool possible and just generate the best possible answer to this topic. And in that case, I want to know which parts were you and not, but it's like I'm not looking for a zero AI detection score. I'm looking for a different score. You look at the same thing in the workplace. When we interview candidates, we do the same thing. We have one interview which is intentionally without AI, and we ask people to answer sort of like without the calculator. But we also have another interview where the job is, please use every tool you possibly can. And we're looking for how well you can use those tools, and then we find the right spots in between. So I think that idea of assessment needs to always be 0 or 100 is not quite the right way to look at it. Boy, we want to know when you say it's human, we want to know it's human. When you say it's not, we just want to assess the work itself. The other thing I'd say is the
And
authenticity suite is not just about is it AI or not. It can be things like hallucination detection, where even beyond the was it you or not, is it correct? Which I think is also an important bar to meet.
right. And I mean, there was an interesting part in the press release I thought you talked about, which is that when you feed incorrect information into these LLMs, the LLMs will then train on that information, which becomes a bit of a self-propagating loop here in the worst possible way, which is that you're just increasing the rate of hallucinations down the road. And so I guess the idea here is that, I mean, somebody has to fact check it at some point, and it can't always be the LLM.
Right.
Although in this case, you are saying it's going to be the LLM.
Well, we're building tooling for it, but I do think it's a real societal problem. Maybe one of the most popular tools from GPTZero is the site I really love. It's called is the internetai.com, and it goes and it assesses for all the popular platforms what percentage of the posts on those platforms are currently graded as being mostly AI. And so, for example, LinkedIn is at the top of that list at 42%. So 42% of LinkedIn posts, the GPTZero tools determine them to be mostly AI. Reddit is at the other extreme, interestingly, of being less than 10% AI. Now, if you think about the way that LLMs train, as they go train on a lot of what they're training on is on all of what's on the internet. And so if you're one of those teams and you're training, you want to know the difference. And you want to know, am I sort of just retraining on what I generated myself, or am I training on new human knowledge? And it's not to say that any of it is right or wrong. I mean, there's good reasons why some people will use AI to write LinkedIn posts. But I think the when you're assessing it, sometimes you want to know, is it the human, is it the person, or is it not? And yes, there is a garbage in, garbage out problem for the internet as a whole as we scale.
So is this then the enterprise play for GPT-0? I mean, will you sort of think about selling this to enterprises as they look to train on new data sets to be able to label data and saying, "Oh, this is this was clearly AI generated content. We should use it as such in our training," versus this was human generated. I mean, I assume
I don't. It's not a primary business the GPT-0 team is in now. I'd say, stepping
because
back, our
it's
number one.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking about consumer versus enterprise here with this technology.
Well, that's a very specific type of enterprise. I mean, I think the broad view is we're going to take the GP0 set of technologies and we're going to introduce them to a much broader audience of people. We have 40 million daily active users on the Superhuman products. We have over 10,000 enterprise customers, and each of them have different authenticity needs. And most importantly, what we do as a company is we bring AI to work where you work. So the heart of what we're going to do is take a set of tools that today are what we consider to be pull tools. When you're ready for an AI detection or hallucination detection, you go to the tool. And instead,
Okay.
we're going to put them to work right where you work. So as you're writing your article, as you're filling out your essay, it's working right where you work, and greatly increases the chances of the tools being useful for you. In terms of the enterprise versus consumer play, I think there's really good. That's certainly one axis to cut on. I think there's really good use cases in both. The other one I look at a lot is the industries and functions. So, students and educators is one dynamic. Recruiters and interviewers is another such dynamic. You think about consultants and their customers. It's another interesting one. If you think about journalists and their audience, I think that's another interesting one. In many of these cases, there is a creator-receiver dynamic where you're trying to find the right balance and expectation for that particular flow of this is how much of this is human versus not, and how do you verify that as both a creator and a receiver.
Right. Let me ask you one question on a separate topic here. We were talking in the segment before you about how companies are grappling with the rising costs of using LLMs. And I know when you were on our show, I think both times actually, you were talking about how many API calls Grammarly Superhuman does. I think it was something like um,
It's over 100 billion a week.
hundreds of million, yeah, hundreds
Yeah.
hundreds of millions or billions.
Mhm.
Anyway, how are you grappling with LLM costs and using these models? Are you looking to open source models more at all and in integrating those into your stack?
Yeah, so we do about 100 billion LLM calls, well over that now, per week. Probably a more interesting stat is per user. That works out to a few thousand per day for every user. That means for any user of our products, especially the Grammarly products, we are likely your number one AI generator. We're probably generating more LLM queries on your behalf than any of the other tools that you're using. So it does put us in a very interesting spot of the flow of AI. About 97% of those calls go to in-house LLMs today, and about
That
3% go
that
out to
you
the
have that Superhuman
that we host
has
and train.
built.
Yeah,
Okay.
but a lot of them start with an open source starting point. The Llama models are quite popular. The Gamma models from Google are also quite popular. So we will start with them. We'll fine tune and train them, and then we'll serve them from our own infrastructure. And that allows us to run at much better cost. And the core of those products run at 85+% gross margins, which is obviously very different than some of the other AI providers out there. I think that pattern of find use cases that work at scale and then take general purpose models and then reduce down to models that are more specific to those tasks will be a common pattern, because I think, users want, as a customer, you want AI that works where you work. You don't want to go to a destination, maybe you go once a day. You want something that really feels like a companion that works right with you. And every time you type a character, every time you open a new application, whether you're in anything from Gmail to Slack to to Apple Notes, you want that set of agents working right alongside you. That can be expensive, and so you have to find ways to scale that. And a big part of our effort has been on making sure we can deliver AI at scale, at low latency, and at reasonable costs.
97%. So what was that this time last year? Was it that high?
Um,
Roughly. I'm just
yeah,
trying to
it's
get.
in the same ballpark. Yeah, we've been
Okay, so you've always been using building your own models
I mean,
with these companies.
Grammarly's interesting. Grammarly jumped on the transformer bandwagon before GPT-2, and so the team has been working on this for a very long time. So
Right.
building our versions of these models so that we can deliver AI at a fairly high scale, especially as you think about it on a per user basis, thousands of calls per day, and you have to be able to do that with reasonable costs and latency. I mean, probably one of the most important things for us actually wasn't the cost. It needs to work as you type. So as you're typing characters, we need to be constantly looking at every word and saying, what are the different things we can do for you here? And we have to do that really fast. And that doing it fast ends up leading to an
Right.
architecture that also leads to better cost as well.
But what about your own employees, the models that they use for coding, for example? I imagine your tech team is
Mhm.
using all these frontier models to
Mhm.
expedite their own processes. I mean, have you burned through your own budgets for using these frontier models, and have you told your CFO that we gotta keep a tighter lid on things?
So far, and we use, just to be clear, 97% of our customer traffic goes to our own models,
Yeah,
3% goes to the others. That's still a huge amount. So we are big customers of all the big LM providers internally as well. I mean, we're right at the bleeding edge of all the different tools. Pretty heavy AI adoption amongst all our teams, but certainly the engineering teams are pushing the limits on it. My mind. I think the companies that are worried about this are measuring the wrong thing. And certainly, if you start with a view of just looking at token spend as your measurement, and I think now we're seeing a lot of companies that are backing away from token maxing as a way to look at it, you'll get all the wrong incentives. Instead, we have a set of different metrics we look at to evaluate whether we're getting ROI on our token spend, especially in teams like our engineering team. We're looking at how fast features are shipping. We're looking at the throughput of our pull requests, looking at latency, and so on. And all those numbers are way up right now. And so far, I think our ROI on our token spend is incredibly positive. I haven't asked them to slow down at all. We haven't hit our breaking point yet.
got it. And when you said measuring the wrong thing, you meant the token maxing,
Yes.
measuring. That's what you meant.
But if you're the type of company where you spend a bunch of AI tokens and you don't get better product or more product shipped to customers faster, then yeah, you're probably wasting your energy. And I'm sure there's people that are in that situation. That's not what we've seen so far. We
Right.
are delivering product. In the last quarter, we've roughly doubled the pace of feature delivery from our engineers. Which, if you just go look at that and compare with the cost of the engineering team, it's incredible ROI. So I don't think we've hit diminishing returns on that yet.
Great. Well, Shishir, always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us. That is Shishir Mehrotra, CEO of Superhuman, here on TITV. Okay. SpaceX shares and Tesla shares are interesting to watch on their own, but they are even more interesting when you compare them to one another. My colleague Theo Wayt wrote a column about the extent to which people are selling Tesla to get into SpaceX. Maybe they're doing it the other way around too. I want to bring him on to walk us through his thoughts. Theo, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Good to be here.
Okay, so what do you think? Are people selling Tesla to get into SpaceX these days?
I think it's hard to say. I mean, if you look at the stock price each day, it kind of
Different
fluctuates, but
story.
it's a weird situation because, in the stock market there used to be one way to buy exposure to Elon Musk, and that was Tesla. And, obviously now there's two and they trade in different ways and it's hard to choose between them, but presumably one of them is going to do better than the other, over some time span. So, clearly all the hype is around SpaceX right now because of the IPO, but that doesn't mean it's actually, a more compelling stock at its current price.
It's kind of interesting though, because Tesla has its own moonshot ambitions here, right? I mean, they might be a little bit closer term than the orbital data centers, but it's sort of like take your pick on which long horizon mission you would like to invest in.
Yeah, I mean, both of the companies have like revenue multiples that wouldn't really make sense for companies not led by Elon Musk. And like there have been a lot of people for many years that have said that Tesla is overvalued, but if you look at it, it's only trading at like 14 times its 2025 revenue, whereas SpaceX is trading at more than 100 times its 2025 revenue. So if you think about, the Elon Musk premium of being able to sell investors on super long-term moonshots, SpaceX has way more of that baked in at this point than Tesla does. But if you think about, 6 months ago, Elon Musk was saying that Tesla is going to build robots that are going to cure poverty and make working optional for everyone on Earth. That's not exactly like, a small total addressable market or vision or, however you want to think about it. Like both of these companies have gigantic ambitions, and one of them has that reflected in the stock price more than the other at this point.
Where are the Optimus ambitions at for Tesla at right now? Bring us back to earth on this.
Well, there's this V3 version of Optimus that's supposed to be the new one that addresses all of these issues that we've written about. Last year we had some good stories about how the hands are
You had some good
well,
stories.
and Rocket,
Okay,
our
and
colleague
Rocket.
Rocket,
That's true. The hands one
the
was Rocket.
robots
That's right.
expert. I don't want to erase him here. He is an expert on this too. But anyway, they've been trying to work out a bunch of kinks in Optimus, and those they've not revealed the new version that's supposed to have addressed all those problems, and that keeps getting pushed back. But Elon says they're still they're building a new factory and they're putting up all these assembly lines, and they're gonna be ready to start mass production whenever they have something to mass produce. So that's still to be seen, but Elon says it's still a big part of the vision for the company.
So the arbitrage play here that you hypothetically lay out could be available to investors is what? Basically, sell your Tesla and buy
Yeah,
SpaceX
I
as
mean,
soon as possible.
to be clear, this is not financial
Not
advice.
financial advice.
I
I know. Yeah.
I do not trade individual stocks. Whatever. Take this with a grain of salt. But in my opinion, both companies are valued in super extreme ways, but the SpaceX one is extremely, in another orbit compared to Tesla's. And Elon and Gwynne Shotwell and other people have been, dropping hints for a while now that SpaceX and Tesla could merge and have this super Musk company that is, all of his companies rolled into one. And if you think that's going to happen, you have a limited window to, get into either side of that merger if you want. And in my view, it seems more likely that the amount of hype around SpaceX and the relative lack of hype around Tesla means that it's probably more likely that SpaceX will go down a little bit in multiple and Tesla will go up a little bit, and they'll meet in the middle somewhere. And so if you're someone that, thinks like, I want a certain percentage of my portfolio allocated to Elon Musk, and you're trying to decide between these two companies, maybe Tesla is, slightly less hyped and makes a bit more sense to go for it at this moment. And you're not gonna have the opportunity to buy into Elon Inc. in so many different ways in the
Right.
future.
Unless perhaps the Boring Company decides to go public at some point. That's
You never
another.
know.
You never know. Hey, before you go, I do want to ask you about this debt offering that SpaceX made public yesterday. They started on this debt offering. Are you expecting there to be more debt offerings of this kind in the next couple months and years?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think they have something like $100 billion in cash right now. But if you look at their ambitions for, data centers and space and the moon and all of that, not to mention the amount of money that they're currently burning on XAI's data centers, they need a ton of cash. And yeah, I think if they're able to raise, more debt, why would they not? I think they definitely will.
Great. Well, Theo, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Theo Wayt, our Elon Musk reporter here at The Information. The latest AI term to pay attention to is AI agent loops. My colleague Stephanie Palazzolo unpacked what those are all about in this morning's AI Agenda newsletter. I want to bring her on to explain it to us. Stephanie, welcome back to the show. What is an agent loop, Stephanie?
So, an agent loop is essentially a new way of running AI models or AI agents to get them to work better on longer running, sometimes more vaguely defined tasks. So, I guess to break this down a bit, the kind of old way of giving an AI agent a task is, you know, you tell it, hey, I want you to try doing this thing. Then you see it attempt that sort of task, you wait for it to finish, then you kind of sit around and give it feedback and give it a new prompt. So it's obviously a very kind of like time intensive manual process where the human user has to be super involved. And so instead of doing that, a lot of people are using agent loops now, which basically instead of, giving the agent each individual prompt, you instead give it a more higher level goal of something that you want it to achieve, and then you let the agent basically run in loops, trying different approaches to completing that task until it does so, or until it hits some sort of like predefined kind of stop um,
So,
milestone.
so can you give us an example of this? Instead of giving an individual prompt, you give it a higher vision task. So like what would be the alternative prompt, I guess, that you would give the agent to sort of encourage this loop?
Yeah, so I think one example that you could think of is, let's say you want an AI agent or a group of AI agents to take a look at all your, monthly expenses and income and kind of come up with like a budget or a summary of your expenses for that month. So the old way of doing things, you might kind of say, okay, hey, here first, I downloaded this Excel from my credit card of all the expenses. I'm going to give that to you. Could you put that into a spreadsheet? And you're kind of going back and forth with the agent saying, okay, now that the spreadsheet is done, hey, I noticed you messed up this one part. Now could you take that spreadsheet and add my income to it? So it's very back and forth process versus with this kind of agent loop approach, you might just give it a higher level task like, hey, can you take a look? Can you connect to my, or like here's like a folder full of all the documents that you need. Now take all of this and just come back to me with a fully built out Excel spreadsheet that has, my income and my expenses, and maybe give me an analysis of my month spending. And so the agent itself will then, kind of go back and forth and do everything it needs to do until it comes back to you with the finished product.
Right. I mean, I see. I feel like I see it. This is not the agent loop, but I see Claude, for example. Those thinking steps. You can, if you're really nerdy, you can click the drop down and see, all the intermediate steps that just a chatbot goes through. Basically, this is the agent going through all the intermediate steps in the background and going back and saying, well, this is not good enough. Let's keep iterating on it until we get a better final product.
Yeah. And a really important part of this process is rather than just having like one agent that is trying to do everything, whenever you give this kind of high level goal to the agent, it can actually spin up these like so-called like sub agents that are all working together and they each have kind of a different role. And so, for instance, a very common kind of framework that people use is to have like a planning agent, which takes the very basic prompt that I might give it, and then it kind of breaks that down into kind of steps that it will take. So if I tell it, oh, make a budget, it's going to say, okay, let's break that down first. Take, you know, first take the credit card statement and then put that into Excel. Then after that, take like, then break that down and categorize it into these different spending categories. So that's like kind of the first planning agent. Then you might have like another agent that is like the evaluating agent. So that's the agent that's kind of like checking the work of the first agent and saying like, okay, is this Excel like breaking anywhere? Are these uh are these columns adding up to the right number, that sort of thing. So you kind of have almost like a working agent and then like a checking agent that's like checking
Right.
agent's work.
How do I declare that I want the agent to use the agent loop? Do I have, because I mean, agent loops, this is sort of a newer type of infrastructure that's being used, right? So do I have to queue it or what?
Yeah, so already there are some kind of like agent tools like Codex and Claude Code out there that are um, introducing features that make it easier to run these agent loops. And so both Codex and Claude Code have this new feature they announced in recent months called goals. And so what that means is you can basically give your agent a higher level goal, like speed up how quickly this app runs. And then the agent will kind of run in loops trying different ways to achieve that much larger goal. So, we can already see this like agent loop approach being kind of productized by these different companies because they're coming out with features that will make it easier for a user to do a loop without having to say, without having to go in themselves and be like, okay, I want you to spin up a planning agent. I want you to spin up a evaluating agent and have to do that in a more manual way.
I imagine it's more expensive though, right? If the agent is doing so many cycles in the background.
Yeah, it definitely is. So one example that actually Anthropic engineers talked about is this app that they made where doing the more simple approach where you just kind of give it like a single prompt and then let it just try, a single time to try to build this app that took like 20 minutes and $9. But using this agent loop approach, it took them 6 hours and $200. So obviously that is like many, many more
Wow.
times expensive and also takes a lot longer, but the end product was a lot better. And I think the good thing with this too is, as each new model comes out, it actually does become a lot more efficient and does kind of help shorten the time and therefore kind of lower the costs of running these agent loops.
How widely are agent loops being adopted right now? Is this something that every company is working on, or just the cutting edge researchers?
So, I mean, I would say it is still more on the cutting edge in terms of like, I think the average person who's using ChatGPT as kind of a Google search replacement might not really care or need to use agent loops, but you can definitely see it popping up, first at the AI labs. We see people like the Claude Code creator talking publicly in just the last week or so about how he's really been using agent loops a lot. And that's really, lowered the amount of time that he needs to spend coding himself. And then from there, we kind of see it spreading to, developers or maybe like startups. But I definitely see eventually this making its way into all sorts of, larger companies or maybe slower companies or slower industries that take more time to kind of catch up to the frontier.
Well, and I certainly see this as being somewhat related to the discussion that we had last week on the show about how agents will basically try to improve themselves over time. Feels like maybe if they're going through these loops, then maybe there's a way to integrate those tools in the long run. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like a lot of this is moving towards, just agents that are able to run by themselves for much longer than in the
Improve
past.
themselves by themselves. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and then combining that with what you're talking about, with just the ability to kind of like improve, and once you try to task once, make sure that the next time that you do it, you're faster, you're better. So all very promising stuff, I think, for the world of AI agents.
Promising, but, before we let you go, is there a flip side to this? Are there limitations still that we should be paying attention to with these agent loops?
Yeah, I mean, there's always limitations to all these sorts of things. I think the biggest one, today are the high costs and how long these take. And also one thing that a lot of people warn about is that, if you aren't careful and you don't give the agent specific instructions on when to stop. So let's say, you know, you might tell it, "Hey, try this task 10 times, but then after that, stop, and then give me, like, an update on how it's going." You can imagine that, especially because these AI models are getting really good at not giving up, it might just kind of run continuously in the background for hours and hours without you even knowing and rack up this huge spending bill, and then maybe whenever you go check on it, you find out that it actually messed up on something after the second loop, and every loop after that has been wasted. So I think you just need to be extra careful in these cases to, like, make sure that you are keeping track of the agent, making sure it's not spending too much. So that's been the biggest kind of worry or concern that I've heard from developers that are using this.
Yeah. I mean, anecdotally, again, these are just basic chatbot experiences that I'm referring to here. But, whenever I ask Claude or ChatGPT to stop because it's having some issue with the prompt, or maybe it's taking too long, it never stops. Like I swear it just keeps going, and I have to refresh sometimes, and I don't know. It's just not very good at turning off, I find. So I believe you when you said that the agent will keep going, despite your hopes. All right, Stephanie, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Stephanie Palazzolo, our AI reporter and author of AI Agenda here at The Information. That does it for today's show. A reminder, we are on this stream Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. If you can't make it then, episodes are available on theinformation.com, on our YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to follow us on social media, on X, on Instagram, and on LinkedIn. I am already excited for our next show tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Bye-bye for now.